Elena Reyes balanced a tray of empty champagne glasses as she squeezed between guests in designer clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The charity gala at the Westbrook Hotel was in full swing, the rich and famous of the city, mingling under crystal chandeliers while sipping drinks that cost more than Elena made in an hour of teaching piano to restless children. She wasn't supposed to be serving drinks. The catering company had hired her to play background piano for the first half of the evening. But when one of the servers called in sick, the manager had asked if she could help out during her break. And since Elena needed every dollar she could get, she had said yes. Just 20 more minutes, she whispered to herself as she dropped the empty glasses at the service station. 20 minutes, and then she could return to the gleaming grand piano in the corner of the ballroom. The only place she truly felt like herself tonight. Elena checked her watch. She had been saving up for a new piano keyboard for her tiny apartment, where the walls were so thin her neighbors complained whenever she practiced after 6 in the evening. Last month, the community music center where she volunteered had lost its funding, and she'd been picking up any gigs she could find. Wedding receptions, shopping mall performances, retirement homes, and fancy parties like this one. Could I get another drink? A woman in a red dress held out her empty glass without making eye contact with Elena. Of course. The bartenders are right over there, Elena replied with a polite smile, gesturing toward the bar. The woman looked surprised, then annoyed before walking away. Elena made her way to the kitchen entrance, dropping off her tray. As she passed the restroom, she overheard a loud voice coming from a small sitting area around the corner. I'm telling you, classical music is dead. It's museum stuff. Predictable and boring. Elena slowed her steps. The voice belonged to a man, his tone dripping with the casual confidence of someone used to being listened to. You can basically guess exactly what's coming next in any classical piece, the man continued. It's all been done before. Nothing surprising there anymore. She shouldn't stop. She shouldn't listen. She had 5 minutes to freshen up before returning to the piano. But Elena found herself frozen in place. I don't know, Jack, another man replied. My wife drags me to the symphony sometimes. It's pretty good. Pretty good? That's exactly my point, the first man laughed. I'd pay good money to hear something that actually surprised me. These musicians today are just copying the same old stuff. Elena stepped around the corner before she could stop herself. 4 men in expensive suits were lounging on velvet couches, drinks in hand. The one doing most of the talking sat in the center, tall with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. He looked to be in his early 40s. Excuse me, Elena said, her heart hammering in her chest. I couldn't help overhearing what you said about classical music. The men turned to look at her. The one who'd been speaking raised his eyebrows, taking in her black pants and white shirt, the uniform of the serving staff. And, he asked, one corner of his mouth lifting. And I think you're wrong, Elena said. Classical music isn't predictable, if you really listen. It's complex and emotional and boring, the man finished for her. He leaned forward. Let me guess. You play? Elena lifted her chin. I'm the pianist for the first half of tonight's event. The man's eyes widened slightly and he exchanged glances with his friends. Well, I've been here for an hour and I haven't heard anything that changed my mind. One of the other men cleared his throat. Jack, this is a charity event. Let's not... No, this is interesting, Jack said, standing up. He was taller than Elena had realized. What's your name? Elena Reyes. Elena Reyes, he repeated. I'm Jackson Reed. The name hit her like a splash of cold water. Jackson Reed, founder of Neurotech Industries. The man was worth billions. His company was revolutionizing brain-computer interfaces, and here she was, picking a fight with him. I know who you are, Mr. Reed, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Call me Jack, he said, smiling now. Tell me, Elena, do you think you could play something that would surprise me? Something that isn't predictable and boring? Elena thought of the piece she'd been working on for years, the one she never played for anyone because it didn't fit neatly into what classical audiences expected. It was too modern, too different. A professor at music school had once told her it was interesting, but confused. Yes, she said. I could. Jack's smile widened. Let's make this interesting. He glanced at his watch. You're about to go back on, right? Play something, anything, that genuinely surprises me, and I'll donate $100,000 to a music charity of your choice. Elena's mouth dropped open. What? Jack, one of his friends cautioned. Maybe this isn't... No, I'm serious, Jack said, eyes fixed on Elena. $100,000 if you can play something that isn't predictable and boring. That's what, about 10 minutes of your time? He turned to his friends. You guys can be the judges. That's not necessary, said one of the men uncomfortably. Fine, Jack said with a shrug. I'll be the judge, but I promise to be fair. He turned back to Elena. What do you say? No pressure. Just play what you normally would if you want. Elena's mind raced. The community music center where she volunteered had shut down their after-school program last month. $100,000 could bring it back and keep it running for years. The music center where I teach kids from low-income families, she said. That's where the money would go. Deal, Jack said, extending his hand. Elena hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, his hand warm and dry. I should warn you, Jack said, leaning closer. I've heard a lot of music. I'm not easily impressed. Neither am I, Elena replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Jack laughed, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. This evening just got a lot more interesting. Shall we? He gestured toward the ballroom. Elena glanced at her watch. It was time for her to return to the piano anyway. Yes, let's go. As they walked back to the main room, Elena's mind raced through possibilities. She could play Chopin, Liszt, Debussy. She knew pieces that might impress with technical skill. But would any of that surprise someone like Jackson Reed? No. There was only one piece that might do that. Her piece, the one she'd been working on in secret for years, pouring her heart and soul into it whenever she had a spare moment. The one that combined everything she loved about classical structure with modern influences from jazz, film scores, and even hints of electronic music. The one no one had ever heard. Jack was walking beside her, his strides long and confident. I should tell you, he said in a low voice. I'm actually hoping you win this bet. Why? Elena asked, confusion momentarily overriding her nervousness. Because, he said with a half smile, I'm bored out of my mind at this gala, and I'd love to hear something worth listening to. They reached the edge of the ballroom. The piano sat in the corner, its polished surface gleaming under the lights. Jack gestured to it with an exaggerated bow. Your stage awaits, Ms. Reyes. As Elena made her way to the piano, she noticed Jack speaking to a few people nearby, pointing in her direction. Word of the dare was spreading. By the time she reached the piano bench, several curious onlookers were watching. Elena sat down, adjusting the bench slightly. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. The familiar sensation centered her, as it always did. She took a deep breath and looked up. Jack had positioned himself where she could see him, leaning against a pillar with his arms crossed. More people had gathered, sensing something was about to happen. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, like someone taking careful steps into unknown territory. Then the melody emerged, clear and questioning, before diving into a complex pattern that danced between major and minor keys in a way that classical traditions wouldn't allow. Elena lost herself in the music, in the piece she'd created over countless late nights. Her fingers moved across the keys with a certainty that came from knowing this music was truly hers. As the piece built in intensity, she dared to glance up. The chattering crowd had fallen silent, and Jackson Reed was standing perfectly still, his drink forgotten in his hand, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The melody flowing from Elena's fingers filled the ballroom, transforming the space around her. What had started as a gentle introduction now built into something more complex, a conversation between different musical voices that seemed to chase and answer each other across the keyboard. Elena's eyes remained mostly closed, only occasionally glancing up to see the reaction of the crowd. The usual background chatter of the gala had disappeared entirely. Even the servers had paused, trays still in their hands, to listen. The piece moved into its second movement, faster now, with hints of jazz rhythms that Elena had absorbed from her grandfather, who had played in clubs his entire life. Her left hand created a steady, pulsing foundation, while her right hand danced above it, sometimes delicate, sometimes powerful. As a child, Elena had been taught that classical music had rules, boundaries that serious musicians didn't cross. But over years of playing both classical pieces and accompanying singers in jazz clubs to make extra money, she'd started to wonder why those boundaries existed at all. This piece, her piece, was her answer to that question. She risked another glance toward Jackson Reed. He had moved closer to the piano, his expression intense. The smug smile was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. Elena returned her focus to the music, moving into the section that had given her the most trouble over the years. It required her to stretch her hands to their limits, creating a sound that was almost orchestral in its depth. She had spent countless hours refining these passages, working through the pain in her wrists, determined to capture exactly what she heard in her mind. The crowd had grown larger. People who had been mingling in other rooms of the hotel had drifted in, drawn by the unusual music. Elena could feel their presence, could sense the collective holding of breath as she navigated the most difficult passages. There was a moment in the piece, the moment she loved most, where everything suddenly simplified. After the complexity and tension of the previous minutes, the melody became clear and direct, like a voice finally finding the words it had been searching for all along. Elena felt a familiar tightness in her throat as she played through this section. No matter how many times she practiced it, this part of the piece always moved her. She could see people in the crowd exchanging glances, some with tears in their eyes. An older woman in the front had her hand pressed to her heart. A young waiter stood frozen, champagne tray forgotten in his hands. And Jackson Reed. Jackson Reed was perfectly still, his eyes never leaving her hands. The final section of the piece built slowly, layer upon layer, like a wave gathering strength. Elena's fingers moved faster, the notes blending into each other, creating a rush of sound that seemed to fill every corner of the room. She was no longer thinking about technique or even about winning the dare. She was simply inside the music, letting it flow through her as it had so many times when she played alone in her apartment, imagining a moment exactly like this one. The final notes came. 3 simple chords that resolved all the tension that had built before, like taking a deep breath after a long climb. Elena held the last chord, letting it ring out before slowly lifting her hands from the keys. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but to Elena, it stretched into infinity. Had they hated it? Had they even understood what she was trying to do? Then the applause began. Not the polite, obligatory clapping that usually followed background music at events like this, but real applause. Enthusiastic, surprised, genuine. People were standing. Someone whistled. The event coordinator was wiping tears from her eyes. Elena remained seated, overwhelmed by the response. She had never played her composition for anyone before. Not her teachers, not her friends, not even her parents. It had been her private creation, something she worked on in the hours between teaching and performing, never quite believing it was good enough to share. Through the crowd, Jackson Reed made his way to the piano. His face was unreadable as he approached, and for a moment Elena felt a flash of doubt. What if he didn't think it was surprising enough? What if he found some way to dismiss what she had created? "What was that?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying in the still hushed room. Elena swallowed. "It's called Crossroads. I wrote." The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. Jackson's eyebrows rose slightly. "You wrote that? It's not a known piece?" Elena shook her head. "No, it's mine." "How long have you been working on it?" "About 3 years," she answered, her hands still resting on the keys. I started it when I was in my last year at music school. My professors—" She hesitated. "They didn't really approve of mixing styles like this." Jackson nodded slowly, seeming to process this information. Then he turned to face the crowd, raising his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we've just witnessed something extraordinary." He turned back to Elena. "Ms. Reyes, I stand corrected. That was anything but predictable or boring." The relief that flooded through Elena made her lightheaded. She had done it. She had played her music. Her real music, not just the classical pieces she performed to pay the bills. And people had listened. They had really listened. "The Community Music Center," Jackson said, turning back to Elena. "What's it called?" "Harmony House," Elena replied. "It's in the east side of the city. We teach music to kids who couldn't otherwise afford lessons. Or, we did. The funding was cut last month." Jackson nodded, pulling out his phone. $100,000 as promised. I'll have my assistant transfer it tomorrow morning. Where should I send the details?" Helena fumbled in her pocket for one of the simple business cards she used for her piano students. Her hands were shaking slightly as she handed it to him. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This will make such a difference. For the kids." "No," Jackson replied, tucking the card into his jacket pocket. "Thank you. That was the first time in years that I've been genuinely surprised by music." He hesitated, then added, "Do you have more pieces like that one?" Elena nodded. "Several, some finished, some still in progress." "Has anyone recorded them? Are they published anywhere?" "No," Elena said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "They're just for me. Until tonight, I guess." Jackson looked like he was about to say something else when they were interrupted by a woman in a sleek black dress, her gray hair cut in a sharp bob. "Excuse me," the woman said, extending her hand to Elena. "Miranda Chen, Blue Note Records. That was remarkable, Ms. Reyes. I'd love to speak with you when you have a moment." Elena stared at the hand, then at the woman's face, unable to process what was happening. Miranda Chen was a legend in the music industry, a producer who had worked with some of the greatest jazz and classical crossover artists of the past 20 years. Yes, of course," Elena managed to say, shaking the offered hand. "I believe Ms. Reyes is scheduled to play for another hour," Jackson cut in smoothly. "Perhaps you could continue this conversation later?" Miranda nodded. "Of course, I'll be here until the end of the event." She handed Elena a business card. "I'm very interested in hearing more of your work." As Miranda walked away, Elena looked down at the card in her hand, then up at Jackson, who was watching her with an amused expression. "This isn't happening," she whispered. "It is," he replied. "And I suspect it's just the beginning." He gestured to the small crowd that had gathered nearby, clearly waiting for a chance to speak with her. "It seems you've made quite an impression." Elena's gaze traveled across the room. People were looking at her, not through her as they usually did when she played background music, but at her. Some were discussing excitedly among themselves. Others were holding up phones. "Were they recording?" she asked, suddenly alarmed. Jackson glanced around. "Probably. Is that a problem?" Elena wasn't sure. Part of her wanted to protect her music, to keep it private as it had been for so long. But another part, a part that had been quiet for too long, wanted it to be heard. "I don't know," she admitted. Jackson studied her for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think the world would be poorer if they didn't get to hear what you just played." He straightened his jacket. "Now, I believe you still have a job to do tonight, and I've monopolized enough of your time." Elena nodded, suddenly remembering that she was in fact being paid to play for the entire evening. "What would you like to hear next?" she asked, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. Jackson laughed. "Surprise me again," he said, before stepping back to allow her space at the piano. As he walked away, Elena placed her hands on the keys once more. The familiar feeling centered her, brought her back to herself amid the whirlwind of the past few minutes. She had more original pieces, pieces that no one had heard, that she had been too afraid to play for anyone. Until now. Taking a deep breath, Elena began to play again, diving into another world of her own creation. The morning after the gala, Elena woke to her phone buzzing nonstop. Still half asleep, she reached for it, expecting to see a message from her piano student who often canceled last minute. Instead, she found dozens of notifications flooding her screen, messages from friends, former classmates, and numbers she didn't recognize. "Have you seen this?" Read a text from her friend Lena, followed by a link. Elena sat up in bed, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her tiny studio apartment was bathed in early morning light that streamed through the thin curtains. The keyboard she practiced on sat in the corner next to stacks of sheet music and dog-eared theory books. She clicked the link, which opened a video titled, "Unknown Pianist Stuns Crowd with Original Composition." The thumbnail showed her at the piano in the Westbrook Hotel ballroom. The video already had over 50,000 views. "No way," Elena whispered, her heart racing as she pressed play. The video showed her performance from the previous night, filmed from an angle that captured both her and the stunned faces of the audience. The sound quality wasn't perfect, but the music came through clearly. Her music, the piece she had kept to herself for years. The comments section was filled with reactions. "Who is this woman? This piece is incredible. I've never heard anything like this before. Classical but not classical? Someone sign her immediately. Does anyone know the name of this piece?" Elena set down her phone, trying to process what was happening. Last night had felt like a dream. Playing her composition, the applause, Jackson Reed's surprised expression, Miranda Chen's business card. But this made it real in a way that left her breathless. Her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Elena Reyes?" A crisp, professional voice asked. "This is Diane Powell from WQXR Radio. We'd like to interview you about your performance. That's going viral online." "Going viral?" Elena repeated, the phrase feeling foreign in her mouth. "I don't understand. How did you get my number?" "It was in the YouTube description. Someone named Jackson Reed posted contact information for bookings." Elena nearly dropped her phone. Jackson had posted the video with her contact information. I need to think about this," she stammered. "Can I call you back?" After ending the call, Elena opened her email to find dozens of new messages, interview requests, congratulations from old teachers, and one from Jackson Reed himself, sent just an hour ago. "Elena," the email read, "hope you don't mind that. I shared your remarkable talent with a wider audience. The response has been overwhelming, in the best possible way. I've taken the liberty of setting up a proper recording of your piece at Riverside Studios next week. No obligations, just an opportunity. The donation to Harmony House has been processed. Call me when you're ready to talk about next steps. Jack." At the bottom was his personal number. Elena stared at the screen, emotions swirling inside her, excitement, disbelief, and a sharp edge of anger. Who was he to make these decisions for her? To share her music without asking? To assume she wanted next steps? But beneath the anger was something else, a tiny flutter of hope. People had heard her music, her real music, and they liked it. They wanted more. Her phone buzzed with another call. This time it was the director of Harmony House. "Elena," Tomas exclaimed when she answered. "Did you know about this? We just received a donation for $100,000. The email says it's because of you." Elena couldn't help but smile. At least that part of Jackson's promise had been real. "It's a long story, Thomas. But yes, I knew it was coming. This means we can reopen the after-school program," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "We can hire teachers again, buy new instruments." "Elena, what did you do?" "I played the piano," she said simply. "Listen, I need to go, but I'll come by later and explain everything." After hanging up, Elena made herself a cup of coffee and sat by her window, watching the city wake up. Her life had been the same for years, teaching piano to children and adults who would never be professional musicians, playing background music at events where no one really listened, volunteering at Harmony House, and working on her own compositions late at night when the world was quiet. Now, overnight, everything had changed. Her phone rang again. Miranda Chen from Blue Note Records. Taking a deep breath, Elena answered. "Ms. Reyes," Miranda said without preamble. "I've been trying to reach you. Have you seen what's happening online?" "Yes," Elena replied. "It's unexpected." "It's extraordinary," Miranda corrected. "I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've never seen anything quite like the response to your performance. People are fascinated not just by the music but by you, the unknown pianist who created something that doesn't fit into conventional categories." Elena wasn't sure how to respond to that. "I'd like to meet with you today," Miranda continued, "to discuss your work and potential opportunities with Blue Note." "I have students today," Elena said automatically, then winced at how unprofessional it sounded. But Miranda just laughed. "Of course you do. How about this evening, say 7 o'clock at my office? I'll text you the address." After agreeing to the meeting, Elena spent the day in a daze, teaching her regular Saturday students while constantly checking her phone as the view count on the video climbed higher and higher. By afternoon, it had reached 200,000. One of her adult students, a banker who took lessons to relieve stress, arrived with wide eyes. "You're the pianist from that video, aren't you?" he asked as soon as he walked in. "My daughter showed it to me this morning. She's studying music at the university and said everyone in her department is talking about it." Elena felt her cheeks warm. "Yes, that's me. Why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. It was a question Elena had been asking herself all day. Why had she kept her music hidden for so long? Fear of rejection? Of not being taken seriously by the classical world she'd been trained in? Or something deeper? A fear that what made her music special to her wouldn't translate to others? After her last student left, Elena sat down at her keyboard and opened her notebook of compositions. She had 5 complete pieces and several others in various stages of development. For years, they had been her private joy, her secret garden. Now she was being asked to open the gate and let others in. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lena. "Have you seen this?" Another link. This time, it was an article on a classical music blog titled, "The Breaking of Boundaries. Who is Elena Reyes?" The writer had done their research, finding her graduation recital program from music school and quotes from former instructors. While Reyes was always technically proficient, one professor was quoted as saying, her interest in experimental forms and fusion of classical structure with modern influences was concerning to some faculty members who felt she lacked focus. Elena snorted. That was putting it mildly. Her composition professor had told her she was diluting the purity of classical tradition with her pop music sensibilities. The article continued. Whatever the academic world thought of her approach, the public response to Reyes's performance suggests she may have tapped into something that resonates deeply with contemporary audiences, a bridge between classical traditions and modern musical languages. At the bottom of the article was an embedded video titled Elena Reyes, Crossroads, a high-quality audio, with a note that it had been professionally recorded at the gala by one of the event's sponsors. The sound was crystal clear, capturing every nuance of her performance, and it already had over 500,000 views. Elena closed her laptop, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. She checked the time, just enough to shower and change before her meeting with Miranda Chen. As she got ready, her phone rang once more. Jackson Reed. For a moment, Elena considered letting it go to voicemail. She was still annoyed that he had posted the video without asking, but curiosity won out. "Hello, Jack," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Elena," he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "How does it feel to be the most talked about pianist on the internet today?" "Terrifying," she admitted. "Why? Did you post that video without asking me?" There was a pause. "You're right. I should have asked. I got carried away with the response it was getting, even just among the people at the gala." His tone became more serious. "I can take it down if you want." Elena thought about it. Part of her wanted to say yes, to retreat back to the safety of anonymity. But another part, "No," she said finally. "Leave it up. But next time, ask first." "Next time," Jack repeated, and she could hear the pleased surprise in his voice. "So there will be a next time. Does that mean you're considering the studio recording?" Elena looked at herself in the mirror, at the woman who had spent years hiding her true musical voice. "I have a meeting with Miranda Chen tonight," she said. "Let me see how that goes first." "Fair enough," Jack replied. "But Elena, whatever you decide, don't let anyone tell you to change your music. What you played last night was special precisely because it was authentic, because it was yours." After they hung up, Elena gathered her notebook of compositions and headed out the door, toward a future she had never imagined possible just 24 hours earlier. Blue Note Records occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in the Arts District. Elena stepped out of the elevator into a space that balanced modern sleekness with warm, vintage touches. Framed album covers lined the walls, showcasing the label's impressive legacy of jazz and classical crossover artists. A young receptionist looked up as Elena entered. "Ms. Reyes, Miranda is expecting you." He led her through the office to a corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Miranda Chen stood as Elena entered, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be great," Elena said, her throat suddenly dry. She'd changed outfits 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a simple blue blouse. Professional enough for a meeting, but not pretending to be something she wasn't. As Miranda poured water from a crystal pitcher, Elena noticed the computer on her desk was open to the video of her performance, paused mid-play. "I've watched this at least 15 times today," Miranda said, following Elena's gaze. "Each time I notice something new." She handed Elena the glass of water and gestured to a comfortable chair. "Tell me about Crossroads. What inspired it?" Elena took a sip of water, gathering her thoughts. No one had ever asked her this before. "I grew up with classical music," she began. "My mother played in an orchestra, so Bach and Beethoven were like nursery rhymes in our house. But my grandfather was a jazz pianist. He taught me that music isn't about staying in your lane. It's about expressing what's inside you, whatever form that takes." Miranda nodded, listening intently. "In music school, everything became about technique and tradition. My professors wanted me to choose classical or contemporary, serious or accessible. Crossroads was my answer to that false choice. It's about standing at an intersection and refusing to pick just one direction." "That's exactly what comes through," Miranda said, "and it's resonating with people across different musical backgrounds. The video has nearly 1 million views now." Elena's eyes widened. "1 million?" Miranda smiled. "People are hungry for something new that still feels familiar. Your music does that." She leaned forward. "I'd like to offer you a recording contract, a full album of your original compositions." The words hung in the air between them. Elena had imagined this conversation all day, but now that it was happening, she felt strangely detached, as if watching it happen to someone else. "I don't have enough finished pieces for an album," she said, the practical concern surfacing first. "How many completed compositions do you have?" 5 that I'm satisfied with, a few others that need work." Miranda nodded. "That's a start. We can pair you with producers who can help develop the rest." She paused. "Unless you prefer to work alone?" Elena thought about the years spent composing in isolation, the joy of creating without constraints, but also the frustration of having no one to share it with, no one to offer feedback. "I'd be open to collaboration," she said carefully, "as long as the music stays true to my vision." "Absolutely," Miranda assured her. "This would be your project, your artistic statement. We're here to support, not dictate." She slid a folder across the desk. "This is our standard new artist contract. Take it home, review it with a lawyer if you'd like, there's no rush." Elena took the folder, feeling its weight. Not just the paper inside, but what it represented. A path forward, a chance to be heard. "There's one more thing," Miranda said. "Jackson Reed called me this afternoon. He mentioned a studio session he's arranged for next week." Elena felt a flicker of annoyance. He didn't really consult me about that. Miranda's lips twitched in amusement. That sounds like Jack. Always 10 steps ahead, assuming everyone's moving at his pace. She shook her head. But in this case, his impulse was right. Getting a professional recording of Crossroads out quickly would be smart. The internet has a short attention span. What about the album? That's a longer process. Months of recording, production, marketing. This would be a single release to maintain momentum while we work on the full project. It made sense. Elena nodded slowly. One more thing, Miranda added. The Williamson Concert Hall called today. They want to offer you a performance slot in their New Voices series next month. It's a prestigious showcase for emerging artists. Elena's heart raced. The Williamson was one of the city's premier classical venues. She'd attended concerts there as a student but never imagined performing on that stage. Wow. She struggled to find words. Do they want me to play classical pieces or? They specifically asked for your original compositions, Miranda said. Your video has the classical world talking, Elena. Some traditionalists are dismissive, calling it crossover fluff, but others see it as breathing new life into a form that's been stuck in the past. Elena thought of her former professors, wondering what they would say now. Would they still think she was diluting tradition, or would they finally understand what she had been trying to do all along? As if reading her thoughts, Miranda said, You've started a conversation. Not everyone will like what you're doing, but they're paying attention. That's rare. After the meeting, Elena walked home through the cool evening air, her mind spinning with possibilities. The contract in her bag seemed to carry its own gravity, pulling her toward a future she had never dared imagine. Her phone buzzed. Lena, again. Just saw you're trending on Twitter. Call me. Elena smiled, shaking her head in disbelief. She dialed her friend's number. Tell me everything, Lena demanded as soon as she answered. Elena filled her in on the meeting with Miranda, the contract, the Williamson invitation. Saying it all out loud made it seem both more real and more absurd. I don't know what to do, she confessed. This morning I was just a piano teacher who played background music at events. Now I'm supposed to record an album and perform at the Williamson? You've always been more than that, Lena said firmly. The rest of the world is just finally catching up. After hanging up, Elena reached her apartment building. As she climbed the stairs, she heard piano music drifting down from above. One of her neighbors practicing Chopin, the notes floating through the thin walls that had so often limited her own playing. Inside her apartment, Elena set down her reed bag and went straight to her keyboard. She placed her fingers on the keys, seeking the familiar comfort they had always provided. But instead of playing one of her compositions, she found herself improvising, letting new melodies emerge from the emotions of the day. Her phone rang, interrupting the flow. Jackson Reed. How was the meeting with Miranda? He asked without preamble. Good, Elena replied. She offered me a recording contract. That's fantastic. Did she mention the studio session next week? Yes, Elena said, a note of reproach in her voice. You know, most people ask before scheduling things for others. There was a pause, and then Jack laughed. You're right. I get carried away sometimes. His voice became more serious. I believe in your music, Elena. I want others to hear it. Why? The question had been bothering her all day. Why do you care so much? Another pause. Because it reminded me of something I'd forgotten, he said finally. The feeling of being genuinely moved by something new. In my world, tech, business, that's rare. Elena considered this. The studio session, she said. I'd like to do it, but on one condition. Name it. I want creative control. The recording needs to be true to my vision. Absolutely, Jack agreed immediately. It's your music, I'm just providing resources. After they hung up, Elena opened her notebook and began working on a piece she had started months ago but never finished. Now the notes seemed to flow more easily, inspired by the day's events. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas at Harmony House. The kids heard about your video. They're so excited. They want you to teach them to write their own music. Elena smiled. Whatever happened with albums and concerts and contracts, This was what mattered most, sharing music with children who might not otherwise have the chance to discover it. Her laptop chimed with an email notification. It was from Dr. Rivera, her old composition professor, the one who had been most critical of her lack of focus. Elena, it read, I saw your performance online. While I still have reservations about the mixing of classical forms with contemporary influences, I cannot deny the technical skill and emotional resonance of your work. Perhaps there is room for many paths in music after all. Congratulations on finding yours. Elena read the email twice, tears pricking at her eyes. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement that her choices had validity, that her music had worth on its own terms. She turned back to her keyboard, playing through the new composition taking shape under her fingers. For the first time, she wasn't playing for herself alone. She was playing for all the people who would soon be listening, for Jack and Miranda, for her students at Harmony House, even for Dr. Rivera. But most importantly, she was playing for those who, like her, had felt caught at a crossroads, told they must choose one path when their hearts called them to forge a new one altogether. 6 months later, Elena stood backstage at the Westbrook Concert Hall, the same hotel where it had all begun. But tonight was different. Tonight, people had paid to hear her play. Tonight was the final show of her 3-city tour, celebrating the release of her album, Intersections. Through the gap in the curtains, she could see the sold-out audience filing in. Young music students sat alongside older classical music patrons. A group of teenagers who had discovered her through social media chatted excitedly in the front row. In the center of the third row, she spotted Tomas with a dozen children from Harmony House, all dressed in their best clothes, wide-eyed at the grandeur of the concert hall. 5 minutes, Ms. Reyes, the stage manager said, clipboard in hand. Elena nodded, smoothing the fabric of her deep blue concert dress. She had chosen it carefully, elegant enough for a classical venue, but with a modern cut that reflected her musical approach. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Packed house. You've got this. Another message appeared from Jack. Break a leg. The world is ready for your music. Over the past 6 months, Jackson Reed had become an unexpected ally in her musical journey. After the studio session he had arranged, he had stepped back, watching from a distance as she navigated record deals and concert bookings. He attended every local performance, always sitting quietly in the back, never interfering but always offering encouragement when needed. Elena slipped her phone into her small clutch and took a deep breath. The past months had been a whirlwind. Recording sessions that stretched late into the night, interviews with music journalists who wanted to understand her unusual path, and hours of practice to ensure her live performances matched the quality of her recordings. The album had debuted in the top 10 on the classical charts and had crossed over to independent music lists as well. Music critics had been divided, some praising her innovation, others dismissing her work as populist or lacking purity. But audiences had embraced her, filling venues in each city she visited. What meant the most to Elena, though, was the messages she received daily from music students and young pianists who saw in her work permission to follow their own creative instincts. 2 minutes, the stage manager called. Elena closed her eyes, centering herself as she had done before every performance since she was a child. But tonight, instead of the nervous energy that had always accompanied her pre-concert rituals, she felt a calm certainty. This was where she belonged. The lights dimmed in the hall and applause broke out as Elena walked onto the stage. She bowed, taking in the sea of faces before her, some familiar, most strangers, all there to hear what she had to say through her music. She sat at the grand piano, a beautiful Steinway that the hall had specially tuned for her performance, and placed her hands on the keys. The familiar feeling grounded her, connecting her to every hour she had spent practicing, every moment of doubt and triumph that had led to this night. The first half of the program featured selections from her album, each piece telling part of her story, the classical training, the jazz influences from her grandfather, the modern elements that had once made her professors frown. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause after each piece, especially the children from Harmony House, who cheered loudly enough to make some of the more traditional audience members turn in their seats with surprised expressions. During intermission, Elena remained backstage reviewing the music for the second half of the program. There was a knock at her dressing room door. "Come in," she called. Miranda Chen entered, elegant as always in a sleek black pantsuit. "They love you," she said simply, "and with good reason. You're playing beautifully tonight." "Thank you," Elena replied, genuinely grateful for the producer's support over the past months. Miranda had protected her artistic vision throughout the recording process, pushing back against label executives who had wanted to make her music more accessible or more classical, depending on their marketing strategies. "I have news," Miranda said, sitting down across from Elena. "3 major orchestras have called this week. They want to commission new works from you, pieces that combine solo piano with orchestral arrangements." Elena's eyes widened. Writing for orchestra had been a dream since her student days, but one she had set aside when her compositional approach had been dismissed by her professors. "That's amazing," she managed. Miranda smiled. "You've created something bigger than just your own career, Elena. You've opened doors for a new kind of classical composition, one that honors tradition while embracing contemporary influences. These orchestras see that." After Miranda left, there was another knock. This time it was Jack. "Sorry to bother you before the second half," he said, hovering in the doorway. "I just wanted to say how proud I am of what you've accomplished." Elena smiled. "All because of a dare." Jack shook his head. "The dare just created an opportunity. You did the rest through years of work and talent." He hesitated. "There's something else. I've started a foundation to support music education in public schools. I'd like you to be on the advisory board." "Jack, I don't know anything about running a foundation, but you know everything about what music can mean to kids who might not otherwise have access to it," he countered. "Think about it, no pressure." The stage manager appeared at the door. "1 minute to places, Miss Reyes." Jack gave her an encouraging nod before slipping out. Elena took a final moment to gather herself before returning to the stage. For the second half of the program, she had planned something special. As she sat at the piano, she spoke directly to the audience for the first time that evening. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "For the final piece, I'd like to play something new, something I've been working on for the past few months. It's called New Beginnings." The piece began softly, almost hesitantly, like her first composition, Crossroads. But where that piece had been about standing at an intersection, unsure which way to turn, this one moved forward with confidence, incorporating all she had learned about herself and her music in the past 6 months. As she played, Elena thought about her journey, from the little girl practicing Bach on her mother's piano, to the music student struggling to fit into established traditions, to the woman who had finally found the courage to play her own music in her own way. The final section of the piece built to a moment of resolution that felt like coming home after a long journey. As the last notes faded into silence, Elena looked up to see the entire audience on their feet, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. She stood and bowed, her eyes finding the children from Harmony House, who were jumping up and down with excitement. Among them was a young girl Elena had been teaching for the past year, a quiet child with an extraordinary ear who had recently begun writing her own small compositions. The girl was beaming, and in her eyes Elena saw a reflection of her younger self, but one with a clearer path forward. After several curtain calls, Elena finally left the stage. In her dressing room, she found it filled with flowers from well-wishers and a small handmade card from the Harmony House children. Inside, in carefully printed letters, it read, "Thank you for showing us that we can make our own music." Later that night, after the post-concert reception had ended and the hall had emptied, Elena returned to the stage. The cleaning crew was at work in the aisles, but they nodded respectfully and continued their tasks as she sat once more at the piano. In the empty hall, she began to play. Not one of her compositions, but a simple Bach prelude that had been the first classical piece she had ever learned. The familiar notes echoed in the space, a reminder of where she had started and how far she had come. As she played the final chord, she heard soft applause from the back of the hall. Jack was leaning against the doorway, a gentle smile on his face. "Perfect ending to the tour," he said, walking down the aisle toward her. "Actually, it feels more like a beginning," Elena replied, closing the piano lid with care. "There's so much more I want to write, so many musical ideas I haven't explored yet." Jack nodded. "That's how it should be. The best journeys don't end. They just open doors to new ones." Outside the concert hall, the city lights glowed against the night sky. Elena looked up at the stars barely visible above the urban glow and thought about all the twists her path had taken, the years of practice, the moments of doubt, the chance encounter that had changed everything. She had always believed that music could build bridges between different worlds. Now she was living proof of that belief. Her music had created connections between classical and contemporary, between tradition and innovation, between the elite world of concert halls and the community spaces of Harmony House. And somewhere, out there, perhaps someone else was sitting at a piano trying to find the courage to play their own music in their own way. Elena hoped that her journey might make their path a little easier to find.